Okay, hello Year 12 and welcome to our third topic in our ethics unit. So this week, and I think for 2 weeks, we're going to be learning about the ethics of Immanuel Kant. Okay, so Kantian ethics. Quick summary appearing now. So first of all, Kant believed that moral duty is a priori true. Now remember what the word a priori means. It means prior to experience. We're going to look at that more in detail. Morality is accessible to all human beings through reason. So Kant places a great amount of emphasis on the power and the ability of humans to use reason. Actions are deontological. Now, deontos, remember, means duty. So this means the opposite of consequentialism. We don't look at the outcome of actions. We simply look at the inherent or intrinsic rightness or wrongness of actions themselves. So some things will always be wrong, no matter what the consequence. And this is, as I said, in complete opposition of consequentialist systems like utilitarianism. So the complete opposite of utilitarianism. Kant was actually writing just a little bit before Bentham, but Kant knew about consequentialist systems, and he believed that consequentialist systems for morality were wrong, were bad. So they're often compared, Kant and utilitarianism, because they're polar opposites. So we have a duty to perform certain actions or to not perform certain actions in all situations. And this is called the categorical imperative. Okay, we'll look at this in more detail, so don't worry if this is unclear at this stage. So there are three formulations of the categorical imperative. So the three things that we must always consider in every ethical situation. And they're divided into these three. So the first one is universalizability. This means you should only act on an action if all people can do it at the same time. Second one is treat others as ends in themselves, never as just a means to an end. And finally, act in such a way that if we all acted in this way, we'd be in a perfect world where all are respected and valued. Okay, so if you get confused throughout this presentation, come back to this slide, because this slide is everything really that you need to know. So this is what you need to know for the course. Everything else that I'm going to introduce to you today is just ways of unpacking this information. So just ways of making sense of this information. And there is quite a lot of detail. Some people struggle with Kant because Kant was an incredibly gifted philosopher, and his ideas for some students are a little bit complicated. But as long as you come back to this slide, you should be fine. Okay, so the Axeman example we've looked at already. Kant actually introduces the Axeman example, and he introduces it in his book, which is called The Groundwork of the Metaphysics of Morals. Okay, and later on, The Metaphysics of Morals. So there's two separate books. So Kant asks, if an Axeman comes to your door and says, where is your mum? He actually says, where is your friend? But we could say mum, it doesn't matter. I want to kill her. You've got two options. You can either lie or tell the truth. If you lie, you will save your mother's or your friend's life. If you tell the truth, your friend might die. Now, a utilitarian, this is quite a simple decision. You would always lie, presumably, because the consequence of telling the truth would be pain. Pain for your mother, pain for you. Therefore, lying is acceptable. Kant, you probably worked this out, says you must tell the truth. even if the Axeman is about to kill your mother, it is always wrong to lie. And lots of people think that this is absurd, this is crazy, right? But for Kant, certain actions are always right and always wrong, and it's never acceptable to lie. And it's for these three reasons. You can't all do it at the same time. If everyone lied, you wouldn't be able to lie anymore. Lying doesn't treat other people as ends in themselves, and it doesn't create a world where all are respected and valued. And I'm going to try and explain that throughout the course of this presentation. Okay, so just pause for a second. Let's just think about strengths and weaknesses, because that's always important. AO2, of course, is half of the marks. So one strength is that Kant acknowledges that you can never predict the future with accuracy, which is a weakness of consequentialism, remember? Consequentialism was, utilitarianism, for example, is an a posteriori system of ethics, which means it's based on evidence. The evidence is, okay, my mother's in the next room, she'll experience pain if the Axeman comes into the house, but you can't always predict the future, remember? And Kant actually acknowledges this really well with the Axeman example. He says, well, let's imagine you lie and the Axeman walks away, but then your mum has heard the Axeman asking for her, and she's snuck out of the window, and then they meet, and the Axeman kills her in the street. You can't predict the consequences. So that's one strength. Another strength is that he says that it's always wrong to do certain things, and this protects life, because Kant will also say that it's always wrong to kill. It's always wrong to kill. Remember, consequentialists, you could, in theory, push the fat man off the bridge to save more lives, which wasn't very fair on the fat man. The fat man was being used as a means to an end, and Kant says you can't use humans as a means to an end. You can only ever use them as an end in themselves, which means you must respect all humans. One of the reasons you must respect all humans is because every human is a part of the moral community. Every human is able to use reason. Now you might say, well, if you tell the Axeman where your mother is, surely that's leading the Axeman to kill, and killing is never right. Yes, but Kant says you can't control someone else's freedom. You can't stop somebody else from being able to choose to do their duty or not. So even though telling the truth leads to the Axeman killing your mother, telling the truth is always the right thing to do, because you can't control his actions and his behavior. Okay, that's his reason, which should be working out the correct or the right thing to do. Okay, weakness, you could argue, does it protect life? Because you can't be flexible. You can't try and save lives by, for example, lying to somebody, or let's think of the example of a terrorist who is about to drop a nuclear bomb, and the terrorist says, I don't know, where is the bomb? You can't lie to him, according to Kant. And even if telling the truth to the terrorist leads to the entire world being killed, it's always wrong to lie. So you could argue that he doesn't protect life. Okay, so who is this guy, Immanuel Kant? Immanuel Kant is probably, I would say, the most influential philosopher since Plato. Incredibly influential philosopher. We're going to look at him constantly throughout the course, particularly in the philosophy of religion unit as well. So Kant was a philosopher who lived between 1724 and 1804. He was German, or Prussian, which is a part of Germany. This was a very important age in European thought. We've already discussed that this was the time that Bentham was writing as well. Bentham was an Enlightenment thinker, and so was Kant. Enlightenment is the idea that humans should aim to think for themselves and not rely on the church or superstition, but try and create a world that's based on reason and common sense. So this period of time coincides with the scientific revolution as well. So this is Isaac Newton, and Kant and many philosophers were deeply inspired by Isaac Newton and his rational, evidence-based approach to science. So Kant wants to build a similar system but for ethics. Okay, so let's go back to this term a priori or a posteriori. So a priori means before experience. A posteriori means after experience. So you might want to just pause the video now and let's think about utilitarianism. Is utilitarianism a priori or a posteriori, and why? So if you just pause the video now and think about it yourself. Okay, so utilitarianism is an a posteriori ethical system. Well, why? Because a posteriori means you need to look at the world and get evidence from your senses and your experience in order to work out or get knowledge of what the correct action is. So if you're stood on the bridge and you have two choices, push the fat man or don't push the fat man, in order to discover that pushing the fat man is the right thing to do, you need to look. You need to look around you and think, okay, he's a certain weight, he'll stop the trolley, there are 5 people here, yeah, the right thing to do is to push him. And the reason it's based on experience is because if you looked over the bridge and with your eyes, that's what we mean by experience, you saw that there were no people here, suddenly the decision would be wrong. You shouldn't push him. Okay? So we've got to see the situation. It's a posteriori. Kant believed that ethics cannot be a posteriori. So he's writing before Bentham, but he knew about consequentialist systems. Consequentialist systems have always existed. And he thinks they're bad, they're wrong, they're flawed. Kant believed that morality is known through reason, not through experience. Which means all you need to do is just to think with your mind, and the answers to a moral dilemma, the right or wrong action, will make themselves available to you. And that's only through reason, not through emotion and not through experience. It can't be based on emotion. It can't be based on pain and pleasure. And the main reason he says this is because pain and pleasure aren't secure enough. Emotions aren't secure enough. By secure, he means, well, they could change. Depends on what you find pleasurable or painful. And he also says it's because it makes us no better than animals. Animals can experience pleasure, animals can experience emotion. But we as human beings have reason, which sets us apart from animals. And for that reason, we should be acting according to reason. So this is very reminiscent of Carlyle's criticism of utilitarianism, the doctrine worthy only of swine. And I think Kant would agree with that. Okay, morality is based on moral law. Now, this isn't law that's given to us by other people, and it isn't law that comes from the church. It's moral law that comes from within. Let's try and understand that. Every single human being has reason. And because of that, moral law, in its complete form, everything that you should do and you shouldn't do, you already know. You don't already know it through emotion or through upbringing, you already know it through reason. And a good example of this is, think of a mathematical sum that you've never done before. It might be 526.4 minus 7. Okay, the answer should appear in your heads. Now, you've never done that sum before, and no one's ever taught that to you, so how did you do it? Well, you used your reason, and morality is similar for Kant. If we use our reason, we should work out the right or wrong action. We don't need to see anything. In the same way that you don't need to see anything to work out a mathematical sum. So morality is based on the moral law, which we access through reason. This means that morality is objective. It's true for all people because all people have reason, and you must categorically follow it. Categorically means in every situation, in every category. Okay, so in every situation, you have to follow this law. So this means that Kant's ethics is deontological. This means that actions are intrinsically good or bad. Okay, so you might want to pause the video again and try and explain it in your own words. Why does Kant think that morality is a priori? Okay, so Kant thinks morality is knowable firsthand prior to experience through reason. However, he also says morality is synthetic. So in philosophy, we have a priori versus a posteriori, but we also have synthetic versus analytic. So synthetic simply means, very similar to a posteriori, synthetic means knowable or true through experience. Okay, so it's very similar to a posteriori. Analytic means knowable before experience. Now, you don't really need to know these terms, so don't worry too much. But it is useful to know that Kant believed that morality is a part of what he calls the synthetic a priori. Okay, so morality adds additional information outside of the experience. So he calls this a synthetic a priori. So the best way of working this out, or trying to make sense of this, is Kant believes that it is wrong, let's say, to kill, and you know that a priori before experience. However, it's also synthetic rather than analytic, which means it adds something. You can understand something by thinking through the situation in your head. Okay? Now, if this doesn't make sense, then don't worry, because strictly speaking, you don't need to know this to get a high grade in the exam, but it is useful. And there's more information about this in the OCR textbook. Okay, so Kant writes this, and it's very interesting. So he says, two things fill the mind with ever new and increasing admiration and reverence. The more often and more steadily one reflects on them. The starry heavens above me and the moral law within me. Okay, so the moral law exists in everyone's head already. It's a priori. I do not need to search for them and merely conjecture them as though they were veiled in obscurity or in the transcendental region beyond my horizon. I see them before me and connect them immediately with the consciousness of my existence. So what do you think this might tell us about Kant's understanding? Well, Kant's saying that we're all born with the moral law within us. It's innate. We don't learn it, it's innate. Humans have reason, which enable them to know the moral law. We don't need to search for morality, because morality shows itself a priori. You can close your eyes and work out the right thing to do. If you're a utilitarian, you can't close your eyes and work out the right thing to do, because you need to examine the situation, go through the hedonic calculus, for example. But for Kant, none of that is necessary. Consequences don't matter. Okay, so let's look at some strengths and weaknesses again. So strength, if morality is a priori, then we should in theory all agree. And this is a good thing. This means that there'll be no more arguments about the right or the wrong thing to do. Could lead to peace. If we believe that all B, Ks are B, for example, this is just a logical statement, okay, then we will be in a situation where nobody is going to go to war with each other. Now, this instantly leads to a weakness, actually, because we don't all agree on the right and wrong actions. Does this show us that Kant's theory is wrong? Well, Kant's response to that would be, we don't all agree because not everybody is using reason correctly. Okay, so we have a strength here. So, to summarize, we don't always agree on ethical decisions. How is this so if morality is a priori? Shouldn't we all agree all the time? Just like we all agree that all black cats are black. Okay, that's an a priori truth, isn't it? Everyone agrees with that. So why doesn't everybody agree that lying is always wrong? Morality and personhood comes through the ability to reason. So Kant says that what makes you a human is your ability to use reason. But then there's a big problem here. What about mentally disabled people? They can't use reason. Does that mean that they aren't human? They're not part of the moral community. They're not an end in themselves, as Kant will describe them, or describe humans, sorry. Kant thinks morality is innate. However, we don't know this. And in fact, many sociologists and psychologists would argue that morality is socially conditioned. We look at people from different cultures, we see that people behave in different ways. Well, Kant would say that some cultures use reason better than others, but you might want to say that morality is just taught. It comes a posteriori from teachers, and it's not innate. Example of feral children. These are children who are brought up without parents, brought up without humans, in fact. Do they have an innate sense or access to a priori morality? Okay, so what we've established is that morality comes through reason. So how do we know what the moral law is then? Well, it's through reason, but how do we work this out? Well, Kant says it's because we as humans can think. We can think. All other creatures just rely on instinct. Okay, but we think. We have the unique ability to use reason, and it's so important. What sets us apart from other animals, and it's what makes the Enlightenment the important movement that it was, because the Enlightenment asks humans, it's a movement in European thought, it asks people to use their own mind. So reason and logic, because it's unique to us, should be what our decisions are based upon. Not religious texts, not scripture, not the church, but our own reason. And our own reason might tell us the same things as scripture. So it might say don't kill and don't lie, which is also what the Ten Commandments say. But the reason we should follow it is not because the church told us to, or because the Holy Scripture told us to, but because reason tells us to. So, comparing again with utilitarianism, how does utilitarianism decide what is good? And you might want to pause the video here. Okay, the answer is pleasure. Now, Kant says, we've already discussed this a little bit, that morality based on pleasure makes you a slave to your animal instincts. But like Carlyle said, a doctrine worthy only of swine. For example, if you fancy your neighbour's wife based on pleasure, what might you do? And this is not a good thing. Now, in defense of utilitarianism, you might not cheat and sleep with your neighbour's wife if you fancy her based on pleasure, because you might work out that it would lead to more pain in the long run. But even so, Kant would say that a moral system based upon pleasure is not a secure foundation. Okay. So if he acts according to reason, what will he do? Well, Kant believes that reason will dictate that it's wrong to cheat, it's wrong to break promises. And that's because the categorical imperative tells us that you can't do it. We're going to look at that, why that might be later on. Okay, so reason frees us from animalistic desires. Reason sets us apart from animals for Kant. And reason allows us to access moral law, because moral law is within, whereas desires and emotions, they encourage us to see morality and good and bad things from without. And this is what makes human beings invaluable. This is what makes human life dignified and why everyone should be treated with dignity. And it isn't just that human life should be treated with dignity, but for Kant, human choice and freedom should be treated with dignity. This is one of the reasons why you can't lie to the axeman. Because if you lie to the axeman, he's no longer able to complete his duty. He's no longer able to use reason because he doesn't know all the facts, even if he's about to do the wrong action. So reason and logic alone are what ethics is based upon. Reason doesn't come from these places. Reason comes from the mind. So this is what Kant writes about the Enlightenment. So this is from one of his essays about the Enlightenment, and he says, Enlightenment is the emergence of man from his self-imposed infancy. Infancy is the inability to use one's reason without the guidance of another. It is self-imposed when it depends on a deficiency, not of reason, but of the resolve and the courage to use it without external guidance. Thus, the watchword of enlightenment is Salpe Oldi. This is Latin, and it means have the courage or dare to use your own reason, dare to be wise. So you might want to pause this and think, what does this mean? So what Kant seems to be saying here is that if you don't use your reason, if you rely on what the church tells you, or you rely on your emotions or your pleasure, then you're being an infant, you're being a child, you're being a baby. And your inability to use your reason is self-imposed, it's your own fault, because you don't have the courage to use reason. So, before the Enlightenment, people were afraid of using reason themselves. They relied on religion to guide them, hence they were infants. After the Enlightenment, infants became human, or men, when they used reason for themselves, not because of what people told them. So these famous scientists, Newton, Copernicus, Galileo, they were all groundbreaking because they didn't listen to what the church said. They said, no, actually, the Earth isn't the center of the universe, the sun is, for example. And Kant wants to do the same thing with ethics as well. So Kant is against Christian ethics in the sense that he believes that you shouldn't be told what to do. Now, was Kant a Christian? Well, actually, privately, he was. And lots of what he says is in line with Christianity. For example, don't kill, don't lie, don't steal. The big difference is Kant says you can work out these actions through reason yourself rather than by the church or by religion, even though they might be the same things that the church is saying. The reason you're following it is different. Okay, so responsibility is very important for Kant, freedom and responsibility. And the responsibility for making moral judgments is with the individual, not any other authority. So you've got nowhere to hide. If you do something wrong, it's your fault as a human being for not using your reason correctly. So Kant believed that humans are free to make rational choices. If people weren't free, the possibility of making moral choices would be denied. This ability to freely rationalize or reason is what distinguishes us or sets us apart from animals. It is this quality of rational autonomy. Autonomy means you are in control of yourself, which gives human beings their dignity. So all humans should be treated with dignity and respect, because we all have the ability to use reason. And it's this that sets his system apart from other ethical systems, in particular religious systems. So let's go back to this idea of morality being innate, being a priori true. And the best way of comparing it is to think about maths, and we've done this already. But maths is another example of something that is part of the synthetic a priori for Kant, which means it's knowable before experience, but it also tells us something new. We have to work it out. So let's imagine that, this is actually a picture of what Jesus would have looked like, but don't worry. Let's imagine that 2,000 years ago, someone asked, does 2 plus 2 equal 4? And let's imagine today somebody asks, does 2 plus 2 equal 4? And let's imagine 2,000 years in the future, somebody asks, does 2 plus 2 equal 4? Will the answer that they get change? Well, the obvious answer is no. The answer will always be the same. 2 plus 2 will always equal 4. It doesn't matter if you're in the past, the future, the present. It doesn't matter if you're on a bridge looking at a fat man. It doesn't matter if you're in a different part of the world, in a different culture. This is a universal truth. And Kant says human reason doesn't change relative to different societies or cultures or times. It doesn't change. And the same is true of ethics. Remember, ethics is a priori as well. So it doesn't matter where you are, it doesn't matter what the consequences are, it doesn't matter what culture you're in, what situation. The answer to is killing wrong will always be the same because human reason doesn't change. So, what is relativism and what is absolutism? And which one is Kant proposing? Well, we've looked at this already. Relativism is the idea that the rightness or wrongness of an action is relative. It changes depending on a situation or a culture. So it might be wrong to eat pork if you're in the Middle East, but it's okay if you're in the UK. Absolutism is the idea that some actions are always right or always wrong in every situation. And this is what Kant believes. Kant is a deontologist, but he's also an absolutist when it comes to ethics. Kant believes there are right and wrong moral actions. Human rational ability means we can discover absolute moral laws that are intrinsically true of themselves for all people in all times, regardless of any consequences or unique situations. Kant's moral theory is absolutist. And this is because our human reason is unchanging, therefore the rules and morals it discovers will be unchanging too. The Enlightenment said people should now rely upon the most powerful tool for finding truth, which is human reason. So recap. Enlightenment thinker, reason the most important tool. This leads to deontological or absolutist moral rules. So it's the opposite of consequentialism or teleological thinking. How? Pause the video maybe and have a think about this. Okay, it's the opposite because teleologists or consequentialists in ethics think about the outcome of an action, pain or pleasure, for example, and then the action can change relative to the pleasure or pain as an outcome. But Kant says the rightness or wrongness of an action has got nothing to do with the outcome. Some actions are just always right and always wrong. Okay? So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put up some statements, and I want you to tell me, please, which one Kant would agree with and which one Kant would disagree with. So I'll put up the statements and then I'll pause the video and you can have a few moments before I reveal the answer. Okay, so it's never acceptable to kill. It depends on the circumstance. Okay, so pause the video and think which one would Kant agree with. Okay, Kant is an absolutist, so he doesn't care about circumstances, he doesn't care about consequences. It's never acceptable to kill, and reason tells us this. Okay, next. There are only opinions, and there are moral truths which are true for all people. Okay, so Kant is not a relativist. He doesn't believe that different opinions about what's right and wrong are equally valid. He thinks there are some things which are facts, true for all people because of reason. Every moral statement will depend on when it's said. Humans have the rational ability to discover laws which are true forever in every context. Okay, and obviously Kant agrees with this one. Doesn't depend at all on when it's said. Like 2 + 2 = 4, killing is wrong will always be true. My action is right because it helps more people. My action simply is right. It doesn't need any other justification. Okay? This is a consequentialist statement, isn't it? My action is right because the consequences it helps more people. And Kant doesn't agree with consequentialism. Some actions are simply right or wrong. It doesn't matter why. Why is 2 + 2 = 4? Well, it just is. Why is killing wrong? Well, it just is. Killing is just wrong. In every situation. We must therefore choose the correct action according to our moral duty. Duty is something that you have to do. And you have to use reason according to Kant. And that's because if you don't use reason, you are not human, or you're not acting like a human. So duty is something that you have to do. You have a responsibility because you're free to perform your duty. So let's think about this word duty in a bit more detail. We use duty a lot. Okay, so in school we think of duty in terms of teachers have a duty to teach. We might also say that a soldier has a duty to fight. Now, why is it their duty? Well, it's a teacher's duty to teach because it's their job. It's what they've been trained to do. They have the ability to do it. They've chosen to do it. And the same is true of a soldier. So what is the unique thing humans have the skill to do? Use reason. Therefore, it's our duty to act according to reason. So, duty for Kant, do what's expected of you in light of what or who you are. You are a human. You should use your duty. Use your reason, sorry. So we are rational creatures, so it's our duty to act according to reason. Okay, so here we have a kind of standard opening paragraph for an essay on Kantian ethics. We'll just read through it now, and some keywords are going to appear as we read through it. So, Kant believed that reason alone is unique to humans. All humans have a duty to fulfill in order to be human. So you need to go through this step by step when you're writing an essay. So I would always start with the idea of reason, and then I would introduce the word duty. So our duty is to use reason when making moral decisions. If we are not doing this, we are not good humans. That's the way to be good. Therefore, the theory is normative. All of the ethical theories we're looking at this year are normative. Going back a few weeks, remember, normative just means it tells us what we should do, what we ought to do, what should be normal. Because it tells us what we ought to do, and what we ought to do is to, I should say, act according to reason. Because reason, let's talk a little bit about reason now. Because reason is absolute and unchanging, 2 plus 2 will always equal 4, for example. Whatever it discovers will also be absolute and unchanging. Morality is based on reason, and therefore moral truths will be absolute and unchanging too. So that's a really important step, isn't it? Ethics should be based on reason. Reason discovers things which are absolute and unchanging, like 2 plus 2 equals 4. And therefore, ethics will be unchanging. What is morally right and morally wrong will be true always and forever. Therefore, Kant's theory is deontological, because the rightness or wrongness of actions will not change relative to situations or consequences, but instead there will be absolute moral duty towards absolute moral law. All human beings, or as human beings, have a duty to act morally because we possess freedom, reason, and duty. Kant says that ought equals can. This is something we're going to look at later on. Ought equals can just means we're free. Okay, because we say we ought to do something, that means that we can do it. We have freedom. This means that a person can only be expected to do something if they can do it. For example, it would not make sense to say that a squirrel ought to read more books. Why is that? Well, the squirrels can't read, and therefore it can never be a squirrel's duty to read. We can, however, say that it's a person ought to act morally because they can. This is possible because humans possess freedom, reason, and duty. Okay? So you might want to pause the video and think about this to yourself. Do you think an ethical theory should be based on reason? Think of one advantage and one disadvantage. Okay. So hopefully you've had a chance to think about this. Well, one advantage we might say is that it makes things a little clearer. Going into any situation, you know, because you've worked it out, it's always wrong to kill. Simple rules. Disadvantage, not very flexible, is it? What if killing in some situations might lead to a better outcome? Well, Kant won't allow it, so that might be a disadvantage. Okay, we mentioned this in the opening paragraph, so let's just talk about ought implies can for a second. This just means freedom. That's all I want you to think about when you hear this expression. When we tell people that they ought to do their duty, what we're saying here really is that you can do it. We never say you ought to fly, because you can't fly. So because we say people ought to behave morally, this means we think they can behave morally. We don't say squirrels ought to read more books or squirrels ought to behave morally, because we know they can't. And this can get a little bit more complex because Kant says this actually means that we can't prove that we're free. It's just something we've got to assume. It's part of our language and it's part of our understanding of human nature. We're going to look at the idea of freedom as something that's assumed but not proven later on. Okay, so humans have freedom, responsibility, reason, and duty. So we're about halfway through. We haven't actually really looked at what Kant's theory looks like in practice, so that's what we're going to move on to now. We know we have a duty to perform certain actions, but which ones? So what actions do we have a duty to avoid and why? Well, this is going to be to do with the categorical imperative. And the categorical imperative begins for Kant by talking about the good will. And Kant says there's only one thing that really is truly good, and that's the good will. The good will means you're doing it for the right reasons. So let's imagine that this man has worked out for a reason that it's good to give food to a homeless person. That's the goodwill. He's acting because of reason. Now let's imagine that this man is giving this food because he wants to look good to his girlfriend who's on the other side of the street. His motive is no longer reason. His motive is to have sex or to look attractive. And that isn't reason. So Kant says you have to do the right thing, but you also have to do it for the right reason. And that's because of reason. So the goodwill is without qualification. It's the only thing that's good in itself because you're acting according to reason. So if he's doing this to impress his girlfriend, it might be the right thing to do, but he's not doing it for the right reasons. It's not done because of his duty. It's done because he wants something good as a consequence. He's performing this action as an a posteriori or consequentialist, or from a consequentialist motive. So the goodwill is performing an action because of reason rather than because of any other extrinsic motive. Extrinsic means external motive. Goodwill is the only thing that is good without qualification because it means you're acting according to reason, and that's the only thing that's good. So let's see if you can work these out yourself. This woman is helping her grandma. Kant might say this has no moral worth, and that's to do with motive. So her motive might be because she feels guilty. Now this isn't good because she's not acting according to reason. So the goodwill is the only thing that is good of itself intrinsically without further qualification. Pause the video, think about it yourself. What does this mean and why does Kant say it? Okay, well Kant says this means that the goodwill acting because of reason is the only thing that matters. And it's the only thing that matters because you're acting according to reason, and reason is what makes you a human being. Okay, so the categorical imperative. So let's imagine you're using reason, and what you will discover is your duty. And your duty is called the categorical imperative for Kant. This means something that you must do. So an imperative is something that you have to do. You must do it. And categorical means in every situation, in every category. So, translated, this means the in every situation you must do, the categorical imperative. And Kant says that this is divided into three formulations. There are three ways of describing the categorical imperative. So, moral statements are a priori, known before experience, synthetic. You need to see how it works through imagining the situation. Remember, you don't need to know this. But the categorical imperative, strictly speaking, is synthetic a priori. With reason, we can work out that some things are absolutely true, but we also need to sort of see how it works in our head. Okay, so we imagine the situation out in our head. You work it out, a bit like you work out a sum, but you don't work it out through experience, you work it out through reason. So let's try and understand these words. So an imperative, something that's your duty to do, that you have to do. And Kant says there are two kinds of imperative, hypothetical and categorical. Hypothetical is an if statement. So something that you ought to do, but only in some situations. A good example is bring an umbrella. Now, should you bring an umbrella out with you every single day? The answer is no. You only bring an umbrella if it's raining and if you want to stay dry. Kant says that ethics cannot be based on hypothetical imperatives. Hypothetical imperatives are consequentialist, right? If I want to stay dry as a consequence, I bring an umbrella. If I want to maximize pleasure, I push the fat man. So ethics can't be based on hypothetical imperatives. Ethics has to be based on categorical imperatives. Something we have a duty to do always. And that's because reason never changes. So hypothetical imperative is something we ought to do in some circumstances if. Categorical imperative is something we have a duty to do always. So I'm going to pause the video after these statements and I want you to tell me if they are hypothetical or categorical. Okay, if it's snowing, I will wear a hat. The answer is this is hypothetical. You only wear a hat if it's snowing. I will always tell the truth. For Kant, this is categorical. You must always do it. It doesn't matter what the situation is. I will never get drunk. Well, for a Muslim, this is categorical. It doesn't matter if you're at a party, it doesn't matter if you really want to fit in, you've always got to follow this rule. If I'm late, I will run to catch the overgrounds. Well, for Kant, this is hypothetical. You only do it if you're late. I will never take a human life. Well, for Kant, this is categorical. You have a duty to never kill because it's taking away another person's freedom and reason. For a utilitarian, this is hypothetical. It depends. If there are 5 people tied to a train track, maybe it's acceptable. If you want to do something loving, you should follow the teachings of Jesus. Well, for Joseph Fletcher, we haven't looked at him yet, don't worry. For Joseph Fletcher, this is hypothetical. Okay, so don't worry about this slide. We'll look at this in more detail. So the categorical imperative. Kant believes that moral knowledge is categorical rather than hypothetical. If something is morally wrong, then it's always morally wrong. E.g. lying. So let's think about an example now. Your friend is going to wear this to your birthday party. You've got 2 choices. Do you lie and tell her it looks great because you don't want to hurt her feelings? Or do you tell her the truth? It looks awful. What would Kant say? Well, Kant would say, tell her the truth. Even if it hurts her feelings, it is a categorical imperative to always tell the truth, and reason tells us this. It's our duty to act because of reason, not because of emotions. Emotionally, we might want to lie because we want to make her feel good, but through reason, we've got to tell the truth. So for Kant, the moral law is universal. We've said this already. It exists for all people in all places at all times. Therefore, the categorical imperative is everybody's duty. So there are three formulations. The first one, universalizability. The second one, treat humans as an end in themselves. And the third, always act in such a way that you will create a law that all people in a kingdom of ends could follow. Okay, and at this stage, I'm going to pause the video because we're coming up to an hour and there's quite a lot to learn when it comes to Kant. And I haven't decided yet, we may extend this over 2 weeks. So you've learned the first half of everything that Kant has to say now. Okay, enlightenment, reason, duty, categorical imperative. The next lesson, we're going to look at what the categorical imperative actually asks us to do. So look at the three formulations in each situation, or in any situation really, but we'll look at unique examples. And we'll also look at Kant's ideas of freedom, a little bit about Kant's ideas about God, and then look at some AO2 issues, and we'll also look at an essay. Okay, so we're going to pause the learning now. We're going to divide Kant over 2 videos. So this is the end of the first one. Okay, so thank you very much. I hope this has been interesting.